Hi, this is Stever Robbins, and I'm here today with Danny Iny of Miracy. He is an authority on course development and the author of the new book, Teach and Grow Rich. Welcome, Danny.
Stever, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, the reason that I invited you here today is because I'm a member of a mastermind group that you're part of. And in fact, it's your mastermind group. And we have been recently discussing hiring people. And for my business, we've been hiring an assistant. There are other people who have had to hire other things. We're shortly going to be hiring probably a technical person and so on. And when I heard the approach that you have to hiring, my basic impression was, okay, they should teach this in all business schools. They should teach this to everyone who is ever going to have to hire anyone, whether it's a solo practitioner or an entrepreneur. You have such a methodical and well thought out way of doing this that I wanted to share it with everyone. So my only real question is, how do you hire people?
Sure, it's a great question. And it's something that I feel very strongly about, and I don't get to talk about it so much because it's not what I teach professionally. It's just, it's what we do running our company. The backstory to this is that when I built my last startup, this is like 2000, this is almost a decade ago, actually. I made every hiring mistake you can imagine. I hired my friends because I liked them. When the chemistry was good, I would bring someone on. It was like everything you can do wrong, I did wrong. And the results were quite predictable. Things did not work out so well. And, over the next several years, I'm just interested in business. I've read a ton of books about hiring, about leadership, about management, took a whole bunch of classes. And so when it came time to bring someone new onto the team, I think this was probably 2010, so it was several years later, I was like, you know what? I know how to do this right. I'm going to get it right. And so I designed this process that I've iterated over the last several years quite a lot, but it's basically geared to give you a good read on whether someone is going to be a good fit for a role. And that's the key challenge, that most of the way that hiring is done is not actually good at assessing how good someone will be at a job. So the way it traditionally works is you put out an ad. The ad, by the way, the ad should be a critical piece of marketing copy. You're essentially looking to attract key talent to your organization. This is critically important. Instead of that, it's like a 7-page long bullet list of, hypothetically ideal requirements that nobody meets all of them. And the ability to read through such a long and boring description is very rarely correlated with the ability to do the job well. So you get a big stack of resumes.
Might be negatively correlated, in fact.
Often because the best people have better options, right? They don't have to do all this. But you get a big stack of resumes. I've heard some companies, they go so far as they take the top 20, put the rest in the trash. That is the filing system they have. But they assess the resume, which is a terrible predictor of how good someone will be at a job. Bring someone in for an interview, ask a bunch of questions about the resume, have a conversation, and essentially hire based on how well the interview goes. And that interview is a reasonably good predictor, according to research, there's a lot of data supporting this, a reasonably good predictor of how well you will get along with the person, but has zero correlation with how good they'll be at the job.
I've even gone so far as to hear about research where they gave people a job interview and then they gave other people like a 15-second with the sound off clip of the first 15 seconds of the candidate. And basically the person who interviewed them for an hour reached the same conclusion as the person who got the 15-second clip, which means whatever it is they're using to base the decision on, whether they're conscious of it or not, it's probably not that last 59 minutes and 45 seconds worth of
It comes down to rapport. That's really what you're making the decision based on. There's another really interesting piece of research, which is looking at different interviews. The less time the interviewee spends talking and the more time the interviewer spends talking, the more likely the interviewee is to get the job. Because people like talking. They like hearing the sound of their own voice. It's like, oh, this person asked me so many questions. They were so interesting. That's great. Which is, again, zero correlation with, that's a good judge of whether you're going to get along with someone at a party. But it's not relevant to how well they'll do their job. And it also means that you're often, people who are going to be great in a role but just don't have the same people skills are less likely to get hired, which is, I mean, obviously not fair to them, but it's also bad for you, for your organization.
Sure.
So what I essentially look to do with this process is I design it like a marketing funnel. You want everyone to come in at the top. You want a good filtering process to get to the best people at the bottom. So step one is write the ad like an ad, right? Get your marketing people to write it. Short blurb about what is the role, who are you looking for, why is this the best job ever from the perspective of the person who's going to have it. Really attract people to the role. They click on the link, they go to whatever the application page is, and they fill out an application. And, you know, obviously the questions will vary depending on the role, but I'll ask a few general, like, you know, why do you want this job? Why do you want to work for us? What were you doing in your last job? All that kind of stuff. And then I'll ask a bunch of simulation type questions. In a situation like this, what would you do? In a situation like this, what would you do? Because that's the only kind of question that has any meaningful validity as to whether someone will be good in the role. I will also include one or two sorting questions. So I'll give you an example. A sorting question, if I'm hiring a copywriter, might be, who are the copywriting authorities that you have learned from or studied under, or read their books or whatever. For a kind of an entry-level position, a good placeholder question is actually, you give them a 60-second typing test. It's fascinating how I've found typing speed and accuracy correlates with so many other success traits in a role. Now, is it the perfect measure? No. But it's a lot better than nothing. So you'll get, you know, if you write a good ad, post it either on Craigslist or send it out to an audience, you'll get a couple hundred people who are applying saying they want this.
Typing speed.
Yep. Typing speed.
Because in the online, I saw somebody's version of the funnel you're describing, and he was looking for someone who I thought required fairly high abstract, non-clerical skills, and he had a typing test in there. And I was just looking at that going, what in the world is this doing here? It seemed completely out of place, but this is...
I'll tell you why, right? Because, so you link people to an online typing test, it takes them 60 seconds and they paste their results. And it measures two things. One is typing speed, and the other is typing accuracy, number of mistakes. And so I'll typically have a threshold for both, because typing speed correlates very strongly with all kinds of tech savviness, right? Someone who types slowly is likely not very comfortable with technology. It shouldn't have to correlate, but it does very reliably is what I've found. And on the questions, on the mistakes rather, in terms of the accuracy, what I found is that either they're just very sloppy or they don't care all that much, because, you know, it's a 60-second test. They could go back and do it again until they get it right. So if they don't care enough to take the test 2 or 3 times to get it right, that also tells me something. So the idea is, now again, that's not the perfect question for every situation. That's the question I'll use if I don't have a better one, because it's not a subject matter specific kind of thing. But I'll get a couple hundred responses, and I'll look at just the filtering question. So if it's a copywriter I'm looking to hire, who are your influences? If they don't mention any meaningful authority in the world of copywriting, or if they're mentioning stuff that I'm like, well, you know, they don't really know their stuff, disqualify. At this stage, I'm not looking for winners. I'm just looking to disqualify the people who are definitely not a good fit. They will advance to the next step, where I'll give them more hands, like an exercise to do, something I can do in like an hour, not something that's a big project.
So this is not part of the initial survey. This is once you've done the filtering for the initial survey, now you have... Usually it's a second survey where I'll have that exercise. And I'll also ask a few questions about salary expectations. So I'll ask 3 questions. The first is, what were you earning in your previous job? The second is, what is the most you have ever earned in your life for 12 consecutive months of work? And the third is, what are your salary expectations for this role? And what I've found is that these together will give me a very good sense of where someone's coming from, what they're likely to bring to the table. And as I'm screening these, often what I'll do is I know what my salary range is that I'm looking to hire for. And I'll look for anyone who's an outlier, who's way above or way below. And I won't automatically disqualify. I'll look at the rest of the application, and I'll basically see, is this a network glitch? Could you back up to say you said you looked for the outliers, and then everything after that got a little bit garbage?
Oh, sure. So when I look at the salary expectations that they have, I'll look at all the applications and, comparing against what I'm looking to pay for the role, I'll look for outliers. I'll look for people whose expectations are way above or way below what I'm looking for. And with those, I'll read the rest of the application. I'll does it look like there's something special here? Because sometimes, if they're expecting way below, you found a diamond in the rough, right? Someone amazing, doesn't know their own value, take them under your wing, they're going to be amazing. Sometimes if their expectations are way above, it's because they're actually bringing this enormously valuable experience and skill set. Usually neither of those things is true. Usually if someone expects to be paid a whole lot less, it's because their expertise and value corresponds to that in terms of what they can bring to the organization. And if they expect them to be paid a lot more, it's because they're a little out of touch with what the role is. So usually those will be disqualified, but sometimes you get lucky. So I'll always read those applications. But essentially, I'm looking at their applications, looking if I can disqualify easily based on, whatever my quick filtering question is, based on unreasonable salary expectations, either too high or too low. And then I turn to looking at the work. If the work looks good, yeah.
But to be clear, you were still evaluating the second survey, which consists of these 3 salary questions and also of a behavioral test of some sort.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was still at the right point in the process.
Yeah. And the exact process will vary a little bit depending on the role. In some cases, I'll only have 2 surveys and I'll move some questions from the second to the first. In some cases, it's a more senior position. So I'll have 3 or more steps. So it stretches out a little bit. But the big idea is you want to get as many people in the top as possible, filter with a question or 2 that are easy while gathering additional information you'll go back and review later. Give them additional steps, exercises they can do where they show you their work in practice in real life, and use that to get a sense of how good they'll be in the role. Assuming they're good candidates, they're kind of my finalists, I'll invite them to do a series of assessments. So we use StrengthsFinder, we use, there's a whole bunch. There's DISC, there's HBDI, there's a whole bunch. You decide which, there's Colby, you decide which work for you, but you want to get several assessments because the idea is that you want to have multiple data points on all fronts.
Okay, and you're looking, you haven't talked yet about how you're going to use the assessments. Are you going to talk about that, or should I interject and say, how are you going to use the results of the assessments? Like, are you hiring for fit as defined as similarity? Are you hiring for complementarity? How do you?
I'm looking for fit with the role. And, again, it's sometimes hard to, in a perfect world, if you've got 4,000 employees, then what you do is you take your best performers in the role, you have them do all these assessments, and you're essentially looking for clones of them. Most people are not in a position to do that, right? I don't have 4,000 employees. I have a couple dozen. So, often when I'm hiring, it's for a role that is new. So you kind of use your best guess. But what I'm looking for is, I'm kind of looking at 3 main areas. Does it look like they have the strategic thinking ability that the role requires? Does it look like they have the interpersonal or relationship building abilities the role requires? And, what the role requires will vary, of course. And very importantly, do they have the execution ability? A lot of people talk a good game, but they don't get things done. So I want to see, will they get things done? I want to see that through their assessments. I want to see that through their stick-to-itiveness to get through this whole process. And I want to see it through the quality of the actual work they submit. And only after I've kind of gotten to the stage where I have candidates that have gone through all this, they look like strong candidates. Basically, I'm not going to interview someone who on paper doesn't look like they would be a great fit for the role. And then when I'm talking to them, I'm screening for chemistry, I'm screening for alignment with organizational values, which is the kind of stuff that you can actually do well in a conversation.
Cool. So tell me a little bit more about the behavioral test, because that's one that I find interesting. It seems obvious to me how you would do it for a copywriter. You say, hey, write some copy for XYZ. How do you do it for other roles? Because I'm assuming that you have a similar hiring process for pretty much everyone you do.
Correct. So you want to think about and sometimes this takes some thought, but what are some tasks that that if they can do this well, they should be able to do most of the key things in their role well. And something that obviously can be done in a few hours.
Okay. So let's say then that I was hiring a technical person because I wanted to maintain a website, which is something we're going to be doing soon. So for the hiring, would it be something like, put up a one-page website with a custom piece of JavaScript using whatever tools you
For example, you want to make sure that you're in a position to evaluate. So, I mean, I know you have strong technical abilities. You could look at their code and have they done a good job. When I hired an assistant, one of the tasks was create a video of yourself explaining why you think you're a good fit for the role and post it on a web page that you create and send me the link. And I was kind of screening for a whole bunch of stuff there, right? It was stepping out of their comfort zone. It was being able to figure out technology, either because they already know them or because they'll stick to it and figure it out. I was looking for kind of a minimum level of, because in an assistant, you're looking for someone who can figure things out. So that's kind of what I was screening for. But you really want to think about what are the key strengths and factors that will lead to success in this role, and then how can I test for that? Got
it. Okay, so we have start with marketing written copy that is as much an advertisement for you as it is to attract as many good candidates as you can, preferably.
Absolutely.
First survey is to do some initial screening, things like, do they know who the people in their industry are? Ask for a short sample of things, and that was the salary questions one in the second survey.
That depends on the role that I'm willing to fill.
Okay. People who pass the first role, the first survey, then they go on to the second survey, which has the behavioral test of some sort, and that's 1 to 3 hours potentially for the behavioral test, plus the salary questions.
Correct.
Those who get through that net then go on to the assessments.
That depends on how senior of a role it is. So if it's a more senior role, I'll give them a larger project that I'll pay them to do. Like, here's a 5 or 10 hour job that I want you to do, and I'll pay you for this. This is part of the process. I'll pay you for it either way, because I don't believe in people working for free. If it's not quite as senior critical of a role, then I'll skip that and go straight to the assessments.
Okay. So then the assessments, and then, now do you actually screen people out based on the assessments, or the assessments something that you're just using to get some insight into the person?
It's rare that I'll screen someone out based on the assessments. It's more often that, like, is there a flag here that I want to be attentive to in the interview, for example? Typically, like, often what I'm looking for is dissonance, because between all the different answers they've given, all the other stuff they've submitted, you start forming a picture of this person. So you're looking for assessment results that don't seem to be congruent with that picture you have. It's a way of kind of checking your assumptions.
Got it. Okay. And one of the meta things that you're always scanning for is how well have they done in this process itself? And what has their attitude been towards it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the number of people I get pitching me on copywriting services, and they send me messages that have typos, grammatical errors, or punctuation errors. You're just kind of like, wow, you haven't thought this through very well, have you?
I remember being approached once by someone who described themselves in their email as detail-oriented, and there was detail-oriented was misspelled. I was like, okay, I think I know everything I need to know.
Right. You need to go under edit spelling, check spelling as you type. Trust me, you'll enjoy that menu item.
And you also want to think about, by the way, like, what are the things, like, the occasional spelling mistake. It's I certain things. I'm one of those people where it's like, oh, you have a typo in your cover letter, you're blacklisted. Like, I don't believe that, but I do look for, if there's a pattern of sloppiness, you're going to see it in this process, because the process is drawn out enough. What's fascinating to me is how many people will drop out of the process, which is crazy. What I'll often do, depending on the source of where I'm hiring from, I'll actually add in a step before the first survey. Like, people will apply. This is especially if I'm approaching my audience and people who know me, I won't do this. But if it's, an ad off of a public thing where they're going to send a cover letter and a resume, my first application, we have a process that we go through, and I kind of describe the process. But before that, I want to just reiterate some key points about the job. It's basically this kind of work. It pays in this range. It involves, whatever kind of the big high level things are, 3-4 bullets. Are you sure you want this job? And like, I'll lose 10 or 20% of applicants right there.
Huh.
Because, people just apply to everything without thinking about it.
Right. Right. Well, I know that one of the things that's always amazed me about job searches is that people, because I used to do a lot of career coaching when at Harvard Business School. I was a career coach for a couple days a month for several years. And the number of times people would take a job because they simply wanted to close out the job search process. And it was like, so you're willing to skimp on the job search process and spend possibly years in a job that isn't a good fit for you, rather than actually going through what's really a small amount of work in the job search process itself relative to the years you're going to spend in the job to get the right job. And it sounds like this is your very first question there was screening for a similar thing. Stop, think about it. Is this worth a couple of hours of your time?
Yeah, I want to make sure it's a fit. Something else that I ask in the first survey is I basically present the question like this, the realities of our modern economy being what they are. At some point, even if you get this job, at some point in the future, you will not be working for me, right? Now, my hope is that it will be a long time. We'll have a great, productive path together. But at some point, you're going to want to move on to somewhere else. And when that happens, it's important for me that you see your time with us as having moved you in the direction you want to go, rather than being a detour from where you want to end up. So how do you see this role playing into kind of the long-term career trajectory that you want?
Interesting. Do people often have an answer for that? I'm very curious, because a lot of people I know.
Yeah, they do. They often do. It's often vague, which is fine. I'm not looking for, how does this fit into your 5-year plan or some nonsense like that. But I want to hear from people that they're interested in skills that they might learn or exposure that they might have. I want to know that it's about more than just a paycheck.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So then finally, they've gone through survey 1, experiential demonstration, and salary questions. They've taken the assessments, and now it's time for the in-person interview.
Well, like this, but yeah.
the possibly technology-mediated in-person interview.
Exactly. Well, because my organization is distributed, so I have team members all over the world. So it's rare that I'm actually hiring locally. Okay.
What do you do once you get to this stage?
Well, I start by turning the table on them and saying, given our process being what it is, there's an information imbalance. I actually know a lot more about you than you know about me. What questions do you have about the role? And I'll do my best to answer them, or the organization, I'll do my best to answer them. And I do have a list of questions that I go through, but they're kind of just conversation starter questions. They're questions that I ask as an excuse for having a conversation and getting to know the person, rather than questions that I actually care to have answered.
Okay. And so the in-person interview, it sounds like you're mainly just listening for personality and maybe for, again, anything that's really dissonant with what they've said up until this point.
Correct. Which is the only thing that we're actually good at assessing in that kind of interview.
Got it. Okay. So can you tell us, roughly, what have you found using this process? Are there any particular places where the same red flags pop up over and over, or where the same green flags, if there are times when you're like, yes, everyone who's ever done that has been someone that
No, it's not that easy. I will say takes it all the way through the process. And typically, if I have 100 or 200 applicants, by the end of it, if I'm looking to fill one role, I have more than one person who I would love to be able to hire. What I'll often do is then reach out to my networks and say, hey, I've got this person who, I've only got one role and I've got 3 people. So I've got these 2 left over. Does anyone want them? And a lot of people in my network employ people who applied to work for me, which is a great kind of byproduct in terms of being able to help all parties. And there's a lot of relationship building there. But in terms of the actual process, just be attentive to red flags, the things that you feel, oh, this might be an issue. It will be an issue.
Got it.
Just like, the stuff that bothers you about someone when you're dating is the stuff that is going to drive you crazy when you're married.
Right. I told you the toilet paper goes under, not over. Very cool. So is there anything else you have to add? Because I want to be very conscious of your time, and you very graciously agreed to half an hour, and we're just about out of time.
I think that's it. That's kind of the process. What it comes down to is the best way to assess how well someone will do in a role is to give them an exercise and see how they do. That's what it comes down to.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I want to say to people watching this, if you're watching it in the I guess it's winter of 2017, Danny is going to be doing launching his new Course Builders Laboratory around his book, Think and Grow Rich, or Teach and Grow Rich.
Teach and Grow Rich. You're going to get me sued.
Please feel free to just completely interrupt me and correct me here. Teach and Grow Rich. Danny is someone who's been mentoring me for the last year in making progress on my own internet training business, which is going to be launching in 2017. And I respect him tremendously. And hopefully after this discussion of hiring, you will too. And check him out. There will be a link somewhere on the video and in the description that you can click. Thank you again, Danny.
Awesome. Thank you so much.